Okay, let's see what we got today here. So we're going over the sun, water, minerals, and we'll take a look at soil here. This will be kind of a multi-part because soil is a big topic, a lot to cover, so I didn't want to overwhelm anyone and try to cram it in, and it'd probably be a 5-hour sit here trying to go through it all. That's the thing that we can control the most is the soil. Okay, so we have some of the things that we'll be covering here tonight is adjusting the mineral profile. That's probably pretty ambiguous, but we'll discuss what that means. Maintaining an ideal environment for biology to live. So biology is very good at releasing minerals and feeding plants. And so if we can get the biology up, it's much better than just getting the chemistry and the minerals right. So the biology can extract them from the soil as well as feed the plant directly. So there's actually, in the plant roots, the bacteria can go inside the roots, and the plant can strip the outer covering of the bacteria cell. They're called endophytes. And then they spit them back out in the soil, and then they rebuild their outer, kind of like outer layering, whatever that is called, the skin, basically. And then they suck them back in and repeat the process, and so they can get nutrients that way. And then, so we got feed the soil biology with compost, mulch, or cover crops. So that's kind of the things we'll be looking at tonight here. So morphology, anyone have an idea what that word means besides? The form, structure, and parts of an organism's or soil. So when we look at plants, you could say, well, what's the morphology of it? So you can sound all important. So that's a term, a college term, as you say. So the morphology of soil or anything like that, it's basically the physical characteristics of something. So first part of understanding soil is kind of getting an idea of some of the terminology that's used when describing it. And so we have what's called soil horizons. And so those are horizontal areas that we describe. So when you're saying, well, which soil horizon are you trying to, work with? And so we got the first one at the top here, which is this kind of not this dark area, but the area above it, basically the soil surface. Although not the soil surface, it's more what's on top of the soil surface. So this area right up in here, anything that's on there, surface litter, as in leaves, grass that's dead, anything that's just kind of living on the surface, mulch type of, or compost or things like that.
Wow.
And so then we have organic matter. So this we call the O horizon. O for organic matter. So if you look at any kind of, or listen to podcasts or farming stuff, they'll talk about different horizons. And so that is one of them there. And then we have the surface and topsoil. So the surface of the soil is going to be the area. So you say, well, what's the surface of the soil? That's underneath all the organic matter. And then we have the topsoil layer. So that would be this kind of dark area here. Or well, no, I guess I take that back. So that's this area here, A. So the A horizon. Now there's normally A, B, and C, but there's this little special area that most of the time isn't there, but sometimes is. So I threw it in there just so you know. It's it's been so long since I heard it. Eluviation, thank you. My memory on pronunciation fades pretty quick. Eluviation, yeah. So that layer is basically topsoil that has all the nutrients and the minerals kind of washed out of it into the next layer. And so it's kind of a dead layer. So sometimes you get that. But most of the time we don't experience that. But it's just something, so if you ever see the E horizon, That's what that is. All the nutrients kind of leached out of that layer.
So most soil follows this
Yep,
layer?
pretty much.
So when you build a house, you want to dig down to the bedrock? Is that the foundation?
No, not necessarily. You just need to get down to the subsoil. You want something that doesn't have organic matter in it, because organic matter, over time, sinks. So you don't want to build on something that sinks. It's like if you dig a hole for a tree and you put a bunch of nice topsoil in there, it'll sink because the organic matter gets eaten up.
Wow.
And so the subsoil pretty much doesn't have, which is this light layer here, doesn't have any, generally not much organic matter. Maybe it has a few roots in there, but not much. So that's the subsoil. So what you usually have like a layer, like mine's 12 inches, sometimes up to 15 inches deep is my topsoil. Sometimes it's 4 inches deep, and depends on where you're at. And it also, what kind of disturbance it's had over the years. Sometimes if you're in a housing complex neighborhood, they've scraped that all away, built their houses, and they try to bring it back. Well, they don't always do a good job of getting it even, or very nice soil. Some like the Popovs have experienced lots of rocks get mixed in, and they kind of think about doing a good job. Sometimes they do better than others, and if they care or if they just don't care. And sometimes they just bring in some loam or something like that, a couple inches of loam, and they spread it over the whole backyard and plant their grass and walk away. And you say, oh, okay. You start digging down, you realize there isn't much there, and then it's rocks or nasty soil and subsoil that they didn't do a whole lot of good job. But if it's natural, like where I'm at up in the woods, basically, or I'm more in farming. I'm farm forest area, so there's farms around me. And then we got this substratum. So that's kind of, you get to, and so all these heights vary. And so there isn't really it all depends on your soil. So basically that's more this area in here. When you start digging through the subsoil and it changes color or texture, then you've hit the substratum. And then that's usually some kind of heavy clay, really hard, or like mine is kind of crumbly. When it's dry, it's pretty sticky when it's all wet, but it's kind of dry down at that level usually when I'm digging in the summer.
We're sandstone. We have sandstone on our hill, so then it looks kind of like that color, but
could be
like a rock.
Well, I mean, you might hit a point where it is kind of rock, the bedrock, area where there's kind of that area where there's usually a mixture, or just there's sometimes certain layers that are just hard. There's an area that a property that we were trying to buy, Pleasant, was it Pleasant? No, it wasn't Pleasant Valley. It was Hidden Valley Road or something like that.
Oh, yeah, up Brewster.
Yeah, up there by Brewster. It was on the side of a hill. It was beautiful southern exposure, trees. But there was rock, not too far down. I think it was like 12 inches, and you would hit solid rock. And they said, well, the septic's going to be super expensive, and the infiltration was very slow. And so the septic was going to be expensive and everything else. And so there was a nice well, but everything else was not so great. When I realized that was rock, it kind of looked, it was pretty. All these little rocks poking out, and it was a nice little thing. But then you think about gardening in that, and that was not such a good thing. So I'm glad God directed me another direction, and so we have fairly good soil where we're at. So anyway, those are kind of the horizons there. Oh, and then I have descriptions of each one, but we'll pass that by since it's not. Okay, and so then soil texture is another characteristic. It's good to know about. So this is something that allows you to figure out what type of soil texture you have very specifically. And so you can gather up 6 inches cross section. That means you dig down with the shovel 6 inches, and you kind of take a little scoop all that section up. So you don't just take a little bit at the top or something, or just take some at the bottom, because you want to kind of all of it, a section of it, scoop up. Take a measuring cup or a spoon and scrape up the side and dump it in there, and kind of get all of it evenly, so you can get an idea of what the different materials in your soil are. So let's look at the next one here before, and I'll go back here. So there's three components. Let's see, do I have? Okay, so there's 3 components of soil. We got our clay, we got our silt. So here's the clay. We got silt, and we have sand. And there are 3 different sizes, and I probably should have showed you the size percentage. But anyway, so the sand you're probably familiar with. Go to the beach. That's about the coarseness of sand. And then silt is more not in between clay and sand. It's more on the clay side. They're pretty small little particles, but they're much larger than clay, which is actually little plates. They're not little round balls. They're more little plates, and they all stick together very well. So that's why you need, when you make pottery or something, you kind of need it to get all the plates kind of going the same direction so they hold together better. Just like kneading bread or something like that, you have to knead the clay in order to get it to kind of line up and stick together better. So anyway, loam, you've probably heard that term. That's like, oh, the ideal soil. So that would be a combination of all 3 here. So how to read this thing? This can be a little bit confusing. So this type of soil that I have at my place, so it's 35% clay, 55% silt, and 10% sand. And that's fairly common in this area in Oregon here, and we're kind of where we're at. So that would be this area here, silty clay loam, and that's what it's labeled as. And so basically there's a range. So you look, you can either, so if you start on the clay side, so you go up to 35, and then that is this little arrow shows you which direction to go. So you go up to 35 at this line, you go over. Okay, so that's the clay line. And then you come down on the silt percentage. So this has a diagonal line. So if we're going to be 55% silt, then we go up to 50, 55, and then we'll go down on this line. So we're intersecting. Now we have 2 points, and then there's basically a range. Well, basically you get your point right there, and that tells you how much sand. It better match up, or you've done something wrong with the math. So it all adds up to 100%. So right at this point, 35 and 55, we go down here on this line to 10%.
Sweet.
So the math works out. So that's why we get our 10% sand. So the sand kind of goes in this diagonal line, and this going this way. Silt goes this way, and clay goes horizontal. So going back here, you can test your own soil by putting it into a mason jar, filling it up. So you want to stick a little less than half of your soil in there, and then you want to fill the rest up with water. Shake it vigorously. Notice it says a horizon. Remember which horizon that is? That's your, what do we call that? A horizon?
That's the surface and topsoil.
Correct. There we go. So your topsoil is basically what you're measuring. And then, so about 1/3 full, 2/3 full of water, so get enough. So add a tablespoon of detergent, this is the term I was trying to remember last time, surfactant. It acts as a surfactant. It keeps all little particles moving and not sticking together.
Wow.
Decreases the surface tension. So that's what you can do with, if you have a bucket of water that you kind of want there outside, but the mosquitoes are always laying their eggs. Put a little dish soap in there, breaks the surface tension, and they'll go up to the top and I can't stick. I'm drowning, I can't breathe. And so they won't be able to stick themselves with the surface tension of the water if you have soap on there. So then shake violently for a minute, let rest. So then they start to settle out, the different components. So this is what happened during the flood. That's why you get different layers. So
Is this your test? That's your actual...
No, this is one I just pulled off the internet. Somebody else explained how to do it.
Because that is way more than
Yeah,
Is
see
that
this?
sand?
Yep, there's a lot of sand in there.
Okay.
And so so you mark basically where you see a line of differentiation. Is the first one is going to be your sand layer, and you should be able to identify that it looks pretty gritty. And then the next layer is going to be your silt. So that takes about an hour for the silt line to appear. And then your clay layer is going to take up to 48 hours before all the clay will kind of settle into place. So, but shake it up, put it on the shelf, and walk away for till the next day or the 2 days later, and allow you to see. Then you can basically measure from the bottom up, get a measurement, and then let's see here. Then measure the next line, and then measure the next line, and then you can figure out the percentages based off the total. And then you're also going to have this organic matter stuff that you're going to have to kind of decide, okay, where's the clay kind of settling out compared to all this organic matter that's kind of floating on top. But anyway, so that's how you do it if you want to try to test it. And then there is a nice little website. If you don't want to go through that much work, you just want someone to tell you what your soil is, approximately. It changes from little area to area, but there is a website here, the websoilsurvey.cs.gov, etc.
Do your own and then compare it. Did you compare it?
I haven't done mine now.
I was just wondering.
I need to, but these things don't always get done when.
Oh yes.
So thankfully, so this is actually, is that mine? Yeah, okay, there's my house. If anyone wants to know where I live,
Cool.
so there's a big field there, and there's a bunch of trees, and there's fields on all the sides, pretty much, except for this little spot over here. But anyway, so I sampled the soil out in this area in the field.
Wow.
So they had a nice rating. So Sulcum, silty clay, loam, 2 to 8% slopes. And so you basically draw a box on the first tab, and then you go to the next tab, and it'll tell you the information about the soil that you selected for. So that's kind of nice. And then it actually says, so then we get down here at the bottom, information, OI, that's the O horizon. Then we have H1, that's your A horizon, the first horizon. So they didn't go A, B, C, they did 1, 2, 3, but you can kind of correlate them. So 1 to 20 inches of silty clay loam. So in the field, apparently they have a little bit more than I have right in my yard, since 20 inches is a little bit more than what I have. Like 15 is kind of the max that I've been able to find up top. And then 20 to 28 inches of clay below that, and then 28 to 61 inches of silty clay loam below that, which I've never gotten down that far. Well, I've gotten down to 3 feet, I think, but I didn't really find, that it changed that much. It was still more clay, pretty heavy clay, kind of crumbly clay actually, at that level. Well drained, told me that was well drained. Depth of water table, about 80 inches, so there's some nice information to look up on there. So that's something you can do.
So the depth of the water table, does that mean 80 inches down you're going to hit water?
Apparently, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's going to be some kind of water down there. It probably varies based on where you are, but the different slopes or whatever, things like that.
You have a well?
Yeah.
Did you dig it yourself?
No, it was there when we bought the property.
How deep is it?
Let's see here, 50 feet, I think. I'm not sure I know the whole depth of the well. The pump is around 50 feet down. So the static water level is around 43 feet.
That's good.
So, and then, so I looked up a few here. The 2 people I looked up aren't here. That's hilarious. That's the way it goes. So just out of curiosity, because Rita's up on the hill in Sweet Home there. So she's got a Honey Grove or something, silty. So that means something. I think that's like percentages or something like that, slightly. So anyway, but it's still silty clay loam, 12 to 25% slope. So she's a lot more slope than I am. up there. Totals of acres that I selected there basically. Anyway, so, but it was, basically the same type, but a little bit different percentages, but in that same little box area. And then down there by the canal in Lebanon, I checked it out again. It's like, well, it's a little different name on there, so but probably the percentages are a little bit different, but still silty clay loam area. Doesn't go to pure loam or something like that. I think Watto's have pretty much just loam down at their place, but there's probably some different type, different combinations. So they're more towards the center, so we're more off to the right on our diagram there. So just a little bit of point of interest. And that determines these things here. Okay, I do have a diagram here. So here's our particle diameter. So you can see here's the clay and the silt and the sand. So the sand is quite a bit bigger than the silt. But I believe the silt is more, it's more like grains. So it's more like little chunks. They're more round, so they roll. And so that's why when you can pour it a little bit more, and it's more workable and doesn't like stick, and it doesn't become as hard. So that's why it's good to have more silt and some sand and some clay. Each has their benefit there. All right, so the amount of water the soil can hold is determined by the different combinations. The rate of water movement through the soil, so that means like in the sand, the water can work its way around through the different particles much more easily than it can if it was like solid clay. It would take a really long time for the water to infiltrate. And then how workable and fertile the soil is. So workable, that means how sticky or non-sticky it is. And then fertile are the nutrients able to electrically hang on to the particles that are there, either the sand, silt, or clay particles. And so they're able to hang on to the clay much better than the sand. And so you get a lot of washing out of the minerals in a sandy soil. They don't hang on to nutrients well at all. They get washed out very easily. So they have to deal with that where, we have a lot more clay, and so we're able to hang on to a lot more stuff, but it also makes, very muddy soils too.
Kind of dry and hard.
Yep, when they dry out, they can crack too, things like that. So how workable and fertile the soil is, we talked about that. Sand is, aerated, but does not hold on much to water, so it doesn't hang on to water either. Like you would imagine, it would go through nutrients. Clay soils generally hold more water, so they also hold more water too, as well as nutrients. Let's see here, texture helps. So there's two terms, infiltration and percolation. So infiltration means how well can it go into the soil, and then percolation is how well can it go through the soil profile. Larger particle size, the more pore space between them, the faster the water can move through. It's pretty obvious stuff there. And I don't know if we need to go through all this, maybe a bit much. I was thinking it would be nice, but it may be not that helpful.
Which soil is water filtered? Do you know?
They use sand for water filtration.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, sand filtration systems. I don't know, maybe there's silt in there too. I don't really know a whole lot about them, but I knew they're called sand filtration, so it would probably be. So let's see. Okay, so they dry out more quickly. So this is sandy soil. They dry out quickly, often low in nutrients and acidic. With water fertilizers, so they leach through the soil more easily. Let's see here. Warms up more quickly in the spring. Dries out more quickly in the summer. Leach through rainfall, acidic. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything interesting produced. Best results. So if you're in an area where there's sandy soil, the best thing to do is add organic matter, because that will fix the soil as well as it fixes it when you have lots of clay soil. So organic matter is the magic formula that makes everything act like a loam. Makes it hold on to nutrients better. Yeah, pretty much that. And then clay soil, heaviest soil types, considered the hardest to work, hold on to water longer and take longer in the spring to warm up. Soil compaction, they have a lot of cracking. So it keeps plant roots from breaking through the hard layers of clay. If it's too heavy of clay, then the plant roots can have a hard time getting through it. They're also rich in nutrients because the electrical, so nutrients I think are like positive and the clay particles are like negative, something like that. Anyway, they're opposite charges, so
Whoa.
that's they're able to hang on to them. Advantages of clay soil, so it holds on to nutrients well, kind of the opposite of sand, basically. Holds on to water and nutrients well. It's kind of the takeaway. They tend to be more alkaline. Oh, my parents have acidic soil and they have pretty much the same type of soil I have, so it doesn't matter. They just get more rain, which I think it is. Silty soil. So it's kind of in the middle, more fertile than sandy soil, so somewhere in the middle, basically the same characteristics. You know, hang on to water better than sand, but worse than clay. And that's pretty much the summation of that. Add organic matter. Okay, soil texture. Organic matter makes clay, silt, and sandy soils to behave like loam when they are not. Organic matter helps clay and silt soils from compacting as easily. So that means you can make a handful of soil and you can poke at it and have it break apart, which is good. You want to be able to hold together, but also break apart when you smash it or something like that. You don't want it just like squish and then doesn't do anything, or just fall through your hands. You want it kind of intermediate. Yeah. So organic matter helps sandy soils hang on to nutrients better, things like that. Soil management, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So we got through the boring stuff and then we can get into the more useful, interesting stuff. So I kind of laid it out as far as the times when you want to get out in your garden and do something and what would you do at certain times a year. So September 21st, somewhere towards the end of summer, you know, you get into the cooler weather. Historically, October 1st is kind of our first frost date. And when the rains come and things start closing down, what was it, last year, things kind of went on into October till I think towards the end of October, it finally cooled down because we got some good heat in the middle of October because I was out there drying my corn. Have a video of it to prove it. It was hot. It got up into the 70s. There was a lot of sunshine, so that was very unusual. So things you want to do is get your harvesting in, cut the plants off at ground level, so don't go out there and jerk them all out. Try to get a mattox or some kind of hoe and try to chop them off at ground level and leave all those nice roots in the soil because that's a good organic matter. And it also gives a food source for the mycorrhizal fungi, which is the ones that kind of build relationships, so they still have a root in the soil to keep them alive as long as possible, though their food supply will soon run off, but they can start eating away at the roots themselves. But rather than trying to add it back, it's already in the soil, leave it as much as possible there. So you can also harvest things like onions, kohlrabi, broccoli, Swiss chard, cabbage. Try to get them out because they kind of last a little bit longer into the fall, but generally they're going to start getting not as edible. You know, the leaves are starting to get rotten on the outside or get frost damage, and they're not going to be as desirable. So might as well get as much out of them, freeze them. You know, try to make use of them as much as possible before the cold weather, or you just don't go out there because it's raining. And so they just kind of sit out there and you've not made use of them. But, you know, things like, so there's, what is it here? Okay, we'll get down to that part. Preserve for winter, basically try to make use of it. Get it frozen in the freezer, cooked. I like to cook my vegetables before I put them in the freezer because they tend to really have a much nicer flavor and they're much easier to work with. They kind of break down, especially some leaves or squash like zucchini. You just kind of slice it, put it in the freezer. It's okay for a few months, but the enzymes are still kind of working at it, and it sometimes will come out with a bad flavor. And the leaves don't have a very nice texture either after a while. They can get frost damage, so cook them. It's basically get them in the form you're going to eat them or something like that, and then freeze them, and then you take them out, thaw them out, put them in the microwave or put them in a skillet or something, warm them up, and then they're ready to go. You don't have to cook them for very long because they're already in a form that you can use them. Dump them into a soup or put them in a stir fry or whatever you want, but they're already in a nice form. And I found that works well for me at least. You're welcome to do as you please, but it just gives you an idea of what might work. So then after you get a lot of your crops out of the soil, plants taken out, you can go ahead and do a soil drench, which we talked about a couple weeks or month or two ago. So that's a good time to do that, and also add some rock dust, so that can be breaking down over the winter, adding some minerals to your soil that your plants took out during this growing season. And then do a final hoeing, kind of get all the weeds, because usually by the end of the summer you're tired and aren't usually wanting to do any more hoeing, but trying to get them all taken out so you don't start, because they'll continue to grow and produce seed. Things like that. Some of them are okay. I've had a few, like dead nettles are a nice one for like covering the soil. Sometimes I use them as a cover crop just to let them grow out if they're not going to be going to seed and they're just kind of a low plant. They're not a thistle. They're not something with a big deep tap root that I'm going to have to be fighting with. If they're a dandelion, I'd get them out of there. But if they're just a little tiny plant, little leaves or something like that, sometimes I'll leave them. I got a few beds out there right now that have some nice little plants on there that I know I can easily get rid of in the spring, but it saves me from having to, plant something else there. Okay, so then use a machete to chop up vines, large plants, corn stalks, something the big stuff. If it's up, fairly high, or tomato plants, chop them up into little pieces here so they can break down, so they're not just kind of all a mess in vines and things like that. So. Get my machete out so I can play with knives. So, rather than getting a cheap machete, I got one that's very kind of expensive, but it's very high quality and doesn't bend very well. It's very, very thick on the thing, so you can chops. So this I got this is a Condor, is the company, and they make them down in El Salvador. They're fairly high quality steel, very kind of a medium hardness, so they're flexible, so you can hit them with a rock and they're not going to chip. They're just going to smash it a little bit, but you can work it back into a sharp edge, but you can get a very fine edge on here, and it has a good weight to it, so you can kind of flick it, and generally you want to hold it with your thumb and your first finger and kind of have a rocking motion rather than getting your whole arm involved the whole time, because that's going to wear you out and you hurt your arm. But if you let the machete do the work, the corn stalks, I take them down, chop them down until they get to the bottom, down to a little bit down there, and then the rest I can use a Maddox or something to chop them off at the root level, and then I'm basically mowing them down here. The beans, so I do corn and beans together. They like to be around each other, and you got a tall plant, and the beans can get a little bit of shade, and they do well down below. And so if one crop fails, they get the other one, or generally they both do well. And the beans can provide a little nitrogen to the corn.
And if they're climbing beans, they can also climb the corn stalks.
Yeah, that can be detrimental to the corn stalks if you don't get it right timing, because if you get the beans climbing up too fast, it can kind of strangle them, and pull the leaves down, and can be a problem. I did it one time and I was like, no, never again. Just strangled my poor little corn that wasn't very tall. If you got really tall corn, it'd probably be better. But the corn I have, that's about 5 feet high, and those bean plants just kind of took over the place. So I do bush beans down at the bottom, and they seem to get along really well and not conflict with the light and the airspace and different stuff. So that's something, so yeah. And then you can mow to mulch it up, leaving the residue on the surface. And then you can add leaves or whatever else you can get, because usually just the corn stalks or the bean plants or whatever is kind of sparse. So you want to add more if you can find it. Straw or something like that if you can get a hold of it, whatever you kind of have in your area. And then add mulch to carrot beds, beets, turnips. So generally you can leave those in the soil for a while, another couple months or so, and they'll do well. Beets eventually, like mine, have already gone mushy because it's just too much cold weather, repeatedly freezing. They have sugars in them that kind of are anti-freeze, but eventually they will get. Yeah, you can protect them fairly well if you really pile it up. I never got around to it, so you just kind of leave them out there. But you can protect them and do fairly well for a few months. But I'm usually cooking them, so I found I grated a whole bunch and steamed them, and then put them on cookie sheets, froze them, and then put them in bags, Ziploc bags, and then I can just break out a little pieces if they're something that will break apart and be kind of flexible, so you're not to have a brick that you then have to defrost the whole thing in order to chip it off. That's what the cookie sheets are good for. I'm sure it's just like anything else. So then option to pull out, cook, and freeze, like I mentioned there. Add mulch to collards, kale, and the like, things like that, big leafy hardy greens that will survive down to about 15, 17 degrees or so. They'll survive quite nicely. The cabbage is not so good. It's okay. It's the same family, but mine have not done real well. There's a few leaves on there that have matured a little bit more, and they're kind of edible. They're not terribly, it's like, not real excited about going out there sometimes, but it's something fresh, and there's some biology on there that's good for us to ingest.
So if you plan and prepare correctly, you can be growing something all year. Is that?
It could. It's generally, so usually you say winter harvest. You can winter harvest things. The kale and the collards, they'll grow a little bit. Like a leaf that big will get a little bit bigger, but it's not going to do a whole lot. It's going to really slow down because of the lack of light and then the temperature. And so you're kind of harvesting stuff, and you can protect it, and you can do all kinds of fancy stuff to try to get stuff to survive the winter. Put a greenhouse and things like that in there, and it all depends on if that's important to you. Whether or not that's a priority to have fresh stuff all winter long. You could do it, and people do it when there's snow. A couple feet of snow on the ground. They can have their greenhouse or these little cold frames, where it's basically wood on the sides or some kind of brick, and then you have a lid with clear glass or plastic or something like that to let the sun rays come in, so you get some light in there. Miniature greenhouse, and there's ways to extend it. I really like to harvest things when it's nice out and freeze them, and then I just go to my freezer, pull out a bag, dump it out, and put it back, and okay, I'm done. I don't have to go out there when it's not pleasant weather, and most of the time I'm steaming my vegetables anyway, so I might as well steam them and freeze them and pull them out. You get a little bit more nutrients with it being fresh, but I just eat a little bit more. It's like you just eat 10% more, and then you're made up. You've gotten enough nutrition. So, but yeah. So survive down to about 17, somewhere in that range. That's kind of when they die. You get down to -4 or something out there, pretty much kills everything. There's nothing much left out there except a few weeds. Yeah. Some of the weeds can handle the cold temperatures, but even some of them are kind of damaged. So if it, usually I try to keep collards and kale going over the winter time. Those are nice ones to be able to go out there and still harvest. The dino kale or the lacinato seems to be a very hardy one, and it doesn't have much of frilly stuff that the bugs can get in, and you have to sit there and wash them out. They're fairly flat leaves, and so that makes it nice. You can turn over, so yeah, okay, they're fairly clean. You can rinse them off real easy. So that's why I like the collards and the kale, because they're very easy to, see what's on them and clean them. You don't have to spend a lot of time intricately, because little bugs crawl in those crevices very easily, and if you're not checking and soaking them or something like that, then you're probably eating small insects. And then some more stuff you can do in the fall. Plant cover crops on any empty beds before the weather turns cold and rainy. So there's basically two options, or I guess you could say three. You want to mulch your soil or plant some cover crop. Basically, it's plants that are going to be protecting the soil over the winter. Or you can cover it with black plastic mulch or black plastic sheeting or big tarps in order to protect the soil. If you have small little beds, you can cut little strips that are cut to size, or if you have a big area, you can get a big tarp and kind of drag it over the top and protects the soil from getting compaction. So let's see here, do I talk about tarp? Any beds that don't have any good layer of mulch and don't have plant cover crops or nothing's growing in it. So I'll just basically protect the soil, and the biology will keep more alive, keep a little bit warmer, keep it from being leached out, nutrients, and mainly just compaction too, and just keeping the biology alive. So don't leave bare soil. If you can possibly, if you look out in your garden, oh, there's a bare spot over there, try to get something on there. Grass clippings, if nothing else, or some dry leaves, or whatever you can find. Because you can, a lot of times mow your lawn, even this time of year. Find a few days that it's dry, go out there and mow, and then dump that out on your garden and spread it out, and you got a nice mulch. So causes compaction, erosion, and kind of the killing of the biology just from all the weathering, the cold weather and the rain and things like that. It gets too wet on the surface, they'll drown. And they'll die off. So bacteria will go, when they get too dry, they go dormant. And when you add water, they'll come back alive. If they get too wet for a few days, they'll just die, and they won't come back. So dry is okay, too wet is not okay. So that's when you're protecting the like leaves and grass clippings. They'll protect. The water will still go down through, but it'll kind of slow it down and protect the biology a little bit more from getting a lot of water going through all at once or running off and things like that. So there's some issues with bare soil. And then in the spring, so April 21st is first day of spring generally. That does change occasionally. Sometimes it's on the 20th.
Is it up March?
This says March. Sorry.
As far as the
Okay, so this date is correct. Whoops. So that date is correct. Let me go forward.
okay, but for the
Yes.
frost-
So that is not the date first day.
Okay. But that's the
But this,
frost.
that's
Okay.
generally the last frost date, average
Gotcha.
frost date, and that's when you should do this. So the date's correct. It's just I misspoke when I said first day of spring, because 21st is generally first day of, like March 21st. Okay, so what do we do when it comes around this time? And you can do stuff now, but generally you want to just kind of wait till it warms up and starts getting nice out and go out there and just get it done. So beds with winter plants, so that would be your kale, collards, things like that are still growing out there. You want to rake back the mulch layer. So you mulch plants that are, like your kale and your collards. You want to be able to mulch those, keep the soil protected, because it'll get bare underneath the plants, and so that's not so good. And the weeds will grow, and it'll be hard to see the weeds, and you'll get thistles and other nice, nasty little plants in there that you don't want to be getting too big, dropping seed, and things
You
like
said
that.
that should say March?
No, this is correct.
Okay.
I just had said, oh, this is the first day of spring.
Got it.
And
got
that's where I was wrong.
it, got it.
It is not. My little brain told me that. Okay, so.
So before April 21st, this should be done, or after?
No, at about that time. So within that week, usually within a week or so of a particular date, like it's always kind of variable on the weather. If it's nice the week before, like the 15th, it's like, oh, beautiful sunny weather. And then, you know, the 25th, it's like rainy and nasty again. And you're just like, well, you can, whenever it gets nice, you go out there and get your work done and try to get the beds prepared. But generally it's fairly nice around that time, and you just have to get some drying down of the soil. You want to kind of wait till the soil starts to dry down, and generally it's getting pretty good about that time. So usually if you stick like compost or mulch or something like that, usually you get some kind of little sticks or rocks or things start to appear on the surface of the soil. And so if you got little rocks, that's a good time to try to pick them out and go there with like a 5-gallon bucket and, you know, try to get all the rocks and other debris and the big stuff out of there that you don't want to be mixing into the soil when you rake stuff around, and clean it up as best you can. Use a garden rake to smooth out the beds. Usually they're kind of lumpy and they're not quite as even as they should be just over the winter time, and just maybe from harvesting, things like that, you know, chopping plants, and the soil kind of gets uneven, so it's nice to kind of get it smoothed out again so you don't have hills and valleys. Because when you add like compost layer, you kind of want to say, okay, does it all even? Well, if you have a bunch of dips, you have a real thick here and a little thin here, and, you know, mound here, well, that didn't quite get enough. So it's nice to get the soil surface flat before you start adding other stuff. So you can even mulch, you know, you want to, hey, lay out your mulch, okay, rake it around and get it nice and flat, but, you know, you don't want dips and mounds in your soil. It makes it uneven. So then you can add several inches of compost if you have it available, or go buy some in. It's a good idea to add some organic matter, protect the soil, and it's a kind of a good way to add, so basically add organic matter, and then kind of, it usually is a little easier to work with. So with some crops, it all depends on what you're growing. Sometimes you got a lot of little stuff that you're putting in, and big leaves and other stuff kind of get in the way. So you can even mowing leaves. So rather than raking leaves, get your lawnmower out with a bag if you have one, and just run over them a few times, and that chops them all up. That's much better. They break down faster, and they're much easier to work with than big old leaves that you've raked and, you know, scooped up, and then you have all these fluffy leaves that don't make as nice a mulch as chopped up. And then you can also get some grass clippings mixed in with them too, and so a little mixture, a little more nitrogen in there for them. Beds with cover crops. So then how do you deal with grass and different plants that you've planted so nicely in the fall? How do you get rid of those? Well, that's the age-old challenge, because commercially they can get out there, they wait till they get to a certain stage, which is called the milk stage, where the seeds are starting to form, and you can squish the seed and it has a little bit of white liquid come out. It's called the milk stage. And that, you run a crimper over it, and there's a big roller with these little lines, and you crimp it just at that right stage, like grains, usually like rye or oats or something like that. It'll die if you crimp it, and then you have this nice mat of organic matter that you can then run a seeder through that can go through that and plant your seeds. Well, on the garden scale, it doesn't work terribly well. I've tried, and because you have to wait, which is like mid-June or something, you have to wait till. It's a little late for getting stuff in sometimes. And so I say, there's got to be a better way. And so basically the only other way is to spray it with herbicide, kill all that down, and then wait a week and then, you know, smash it down, or, you know, till it in or something like that. But generally, you know, glyphosate is what they call a chelator. It makes nutrients unavailable to plants, which is why they die. But then it also has that effect in your soil. And so it's not good to have, and it doesn't go away as they say it's supposed to break down. Well, it still kind of hangs around and causes problems, nutrient deficiencies in plants that you grow. So that isn't such a great option. So basically, either spading or tilling it in are basically the two options you got. Because usually, if you have plants that are kind of weak, like peas or something like that, those are easy. You just smash them down, they'll die, or chop them off. Weed whack through there or mow them down, and they're dead. But you get things like rye or wheat or oats, things like that. Some of the grains that are real nice to have because they really have a lot of roots. Generally, they have as much roots below as there is, a plant above. So you see, plants that high. Well, it's got roots that deep and that much organic matter below. That's nice. So they hang on to the soil, they protect it, they create a living root for fungi to connect with and stay alive. So that when you put your plant in the ground, hey, they go after your plant that you want, that you planted in there, and then they make the connections. But if you just bare soil, then they generally will die off and or maybe not even be around. So it's good to have a living root in the soil as much as possible. Let's see here, what else here? Doesn't pile on the cart. Okay, so it gets a little complicated, but you want to, string trim, weed whacker type stuff, get in there to get the plants down before you try to till it in, because otherwise you get all these. If the plant gets flipped over in, but it's still sticking up out of the soil, the top of the grass, basically, the grass that's sticking up, it'll continue to grow. And so it won't really die unless you get completely everything buried. And that's hard to do when you got things like this tall or even that tall. So mow it off, string trim it, whatever, get it all the way down to the ground as much as possible. And then it's very easy to till that in, or you can take a shovel, put it in the ground, flip it over, and get the top down so that the roots are sticking up. And then you can chop it around a little bit and then rake it. So if you don't have a tiller, which I didn't have for years, you can just use a shovel, go down your bed. And I have a video of me doing it on my YouTube channel. You can do that to prepare soil when it's got all this grass and other stuff you want to get rid of quickly. You flip it all the way over each little chunk and you just kind of go back and forth down in your bed, and you can flip it all over and you have nice bare soil. Basically and it actually does a better job of burying the grass and killing it than tilling it, because it's all kinds of different directions.
Yeah.
And you get some sticking up and you have to kind of manually go there and try to bury it, dig a little hole, stuff the grass down there and try to cover it up and try to get it out of it so it'll die. So that's why get it off there temporarily. Till under the plant roots to kill them, or spade them under, rake smooth after that, the bare soil basically, and then add several inches of compost. So basically put your finest material towards the bottom and then your rougher material, coarser material towards the top. So all the plant tops that you've now raked off, got off the bed, saved on the side there, you want to add those back in, or compost them if you want to. If you want nice pretty beds or something like that, or just don't. You don't have to put them back, but you could put all the plant material back on there. And then May 1st to 15 is usually times where you can set out your plants, somewhere in that time frame, and sometimes it's a little later. Like last year was quite late, and so you kind of have to watch the weather, watch the temperatures, and see when things can go out and measure your soil temperature if you're planting seed. And just even for warmer crops, you don't want to be buying peppers and setting them out when the soil's 60 degrees or 55. They don't like that too much, so you want to make sure it has nice warm soil. Bean seeds need at least 65 degrees before you start planting those out. Generally the beans, you can do them in pots, like 3.5-inch pots or something like that, and set them out there. If you got a lot, that's a lot of plants to transplant. So you can just direct sow them, and they usually do fine. They're just a little more delayed.
I did both this last year, and the direct sow later far surpassed the
Oh, really?
transplants that I
Oh, okay.
had done. That,
Good to know.
Yeah, just kind of
they just plain.
a lot of times you have to do both and try to figure out what works for you and sometimes it's just more of, oh, this is such a pain. Even though it may work a little bit better, it's a pain, and therefore you say, oh, forget it, I'll just do it this way. So, and some people say, well, I don't mind, I like this better. And so you just don't, it's not a, do it one way or nothing. It's, kind of figure out what way it works for you and which type of seeds you like to direct sow and which ones you don't and which ones you think do better. And sometimes it's like, well, this year it did better, but other years it was better the other way. And it's like they say, cucumbers and melons like to not have their roots disturbed, and so sometimes it's better to just direct sow. But my mom's done that, plant them out there, and here's your little scrawny little things that don't do anything, and I'm setting out my big beautiful plants, and they take off, and I'm like, well, I don't know, mine seem to do fine. And so I don't know, it's a lot of practice and what works for you. And then when you're setting out your plants, here's a little transplant drench you can add there to kind of jumpstart them, to get the biology going. So I think molasses is spelled wrong, so please don't critique it too much, but it looks a little wrong right now. I don't know if it is or not.
I think there's 2 S's in the middle.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but I wasn't quite sure. It's like, no, maybe it's one.
I know sometimes I can look and see something doesn't look right, but I'm not sure how to
Yeah,
fix
2
it.
S's would be.
Molasses.
Here's what I found.
Oh yeah, 2 S's. Sorry. Correct it. Seaweed, so dried seaweed or whatever that you can find, blended in water, so it can be put in usually like a watering can. After you do your transplants or your seeds, go down with a watering can and give them just a little bit, a couple tablespoons of water or the liquid, Himalayan salt or something like that, Winterdiet, blended. If you're doing more of a sprinkling, but it also helps to get it a little finer and keeps it in solution a little easier. You really have to kind of take a paint stirrer, like I mentioned, and that's why on my watering can I opened it up more. That's another reason, so I can get a stick in there and stir. If you have a little tiny hole, it's really hard to start to agitate that and stir that. So the bigger the better. Or you can put it into a 5-gallon bucket and stir it all up nicely and pour it in your watering can, and then all this pouring mechanism also agitates it and keeps it in solution, and go and water all your plants. And then some minerals there that generally are needed that have leached out over the winter time. And then some soil inoculants and all. This is a good video, but we don't have time to cover all the detail. Well, this is the summation of it, but it's good. I'd recommend watching it by Dan Kittredge. He had a nice reasons and explanation of how to do it, a little more than just the summary here. But if you just need a summary, basically going for a walk, he says, take a bucket and a little shovel, and you go looking for healthy plants in little places, like if you have a little forested area or a field nearby, you kind of dig a little hole and pull out a couple cups worth of soil, and then you cover it back up and you go to another area and dig another hole and take some more soil out, and use that to get all the fungal matter that's good in there, spores and different fungal hyphae. So hyphae are the little strands of fungus that you see there, little white ones that you see growing, that's called hyphae. So you get little pieces of that will then grow out, and different biology and different microbes and things like that are in the good soil that your garden may be deficient in, or so that's a way to inoculate it, get it more populations that might be helpful to your plants. Then so basically just get about a couple gallons worth of soil from different places. Add water, stir it up well, let it sit, and then pour off the water into another bucket and use that for your in with this stuff up here, all the molasses and the other stuff. Mix that all in together and just, that basically just go around and you get all your plants watered with that. So, and then cover crops. So this gives a little bit of idea in the fall what you might be planting. So give you some options. You can do some research and kind of learn about the different ones and different mixes. Wilco has a mix. Not, it's pretty good. Doesn't have the oats. Does have the buckwheat and some rye in there, but it has Austrian winter peas in there. Some other ones in there that are fairly good. So oats are good for. So reason why oats and not like wheat or something like that, because they do winter kill a little more easily, but they also have a reducing effect on the soil, disease suppressing. So that's what John Kemp was recommending these, because they're disease suppressive. So the diseases have a hard time keeping their populations up when in the presence of these plants, and also it keeps them from oxidizing the soil. It kind of reduces the soil, which is the opposite of oxidation. There's other plants that will oxidize the soil when they're growing, and so these are recommended for that. Buckwheat is I think you can also do it in the spring too. That's something after it starts to warm up, you could plant it again and get another crop, but it kills pretty easily from the frost. So you get some organic matter, it grows up a little bit, and then it gets killed with the frost.
Trim it down and then flip it over, or is this one that would just die from?
Yeah, the buckwheat.
frost?
Yeah, so the oats are probably going to survive, but I haven't done a lot of been able to find or go out and buy seed for it yet to really try it. I've done rye before, and that's pretty hardy. So you have to. It's like grass. It's like a lawn. Then you have to deal with this lawn. So you have to mow it down and then flip it over or till it in.
I like the cover crop idea. I just didn't want to have to do all that work
Yeah.
where you have to flip everything over. But it sounds like maybe
There's a lot of benefit. Yeah.
buckwheat might be good, where it'll protect it over the winter from
Yeah.
erosion and everything. But then I wouldn't have to flip it over if it's just killed by the frost. Could it?
Yeah. It dies, and so and oats. So what is it? About 20 degrees. See, I don't think we even hit. I'm not sure we even hit 20.
Sometimes.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, yeah, we got freezing a couple times.
We got 23, 24 maybe in that range, but it hasn't gotten that cold, so
Yeah.
it would probably still be doing very healthy like a lawn
Yeah.
at this time of year, and we may not get any colder. So that's something to think about. But it is, if all the plants die and there isn't much there, then it's not doing a whole lot of good for you
Yeah,
either.
that's true.
So living plants, that's what's nice about the grains, is that they will survive and they will provide nice cover and weed suppression all through the growing season there.
I
so-
thought maybe they would just leave like the dead buckwheat. on
Yeah,
top.
but
It'd
they're
kinda
pretty
be like a
delicate.
mulch, but
They're
maybe
pretty
not
delicate
thick
plants. You can see them there. They're pretty little stems and very succulent leaves, and they pretty much go to nothing
enough.
because there's 90% water, and,
Okay.
and so there's
Not
not a lot of organic matter. They're kind of one stem plants. So this is what they make flax out of, or linen.
Oh.
So it's the same plant they make linen out of. So they take the stalks, which can get about waist high, and they chop them down, and then they let them dry out. And then you can pull off the outer hull, or else you pop off all the seeds. You can take like a fork and pull them through, it all pops off all the seeds, and then you have these stalks left over, and then you let them rot a little bit, so the outside rots, and the fibers inside are your nice linen. And then they can spin those and turn them into string, I guess, that you would then use, or thread that you could use to weave with, make cloth. So it's very interesting. Look up on YouTube how to make linen or turn flax into linen. It's quite a process. Okay, so then so we got mustard. So this is more of, it prevents erosion, suppresses weeds too. But it's mainly used as a biofumigant. So fumigation is what kills off all the biology. So it kind of kills off a lot of the bad fungus that may be in your soil that you're having problems with. So that's what that's beneficial for. It's part of the cabbage, broccoli family, brassicas, if I remember right. And then tillage radishes, which are also that family. those has some nice, basically for tilling your soil, loosening your soil up. It's really compacted. Those roots will go down there and loosen it up and create air spaces, and they do some nice things there. Foliage rape or rape seed, you can find that online or different places. That's what this is here. So they make oil out of that. I don't know if I think it's like canola or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah, they just get, Canada Oil is where canola came from.
Oh, interesting.
They like took an abbreviation to make this like canola. It sounds like a
That
neat
sounds
oil.
better than-
Rapeseed just doesn't,
Definitely.
it doesn't sound very nice. So, then annual ryegrass. That's another one that's fairly good. It keeps it rapidly produces ground cover, holds the soil, gets water, wind, prevents compaction, improves soil tilth. So a lot of them improve soil tilth. So all this organic matter in there, and they break it up. And also the tilth also refers to like little glue that bacteria produce that kind of glues the particles together, but they're all kind of like little chunks or little ball bearings or something like that. It'll all work together, but they're not just one big clump. Generally, they're called aggregates, soil aggregates that it creates. Austrian winter pea is another one you'll see a lot. It looks just like a regular, very round pea, just like kind of like split peas. They're not all shriveled up like you'd see a garden sweet pea. They're very, very smooth and like a little globe.
Are they
So-
edible or are they just?
Yeah, you can eat them, I suppose. They're kind of like split peas, so they're not sweet.
Okay.
They're starchy,
Okay.
and so they don't have as much water in them, so they're a lot, I suppose they're. I never tried them, but they're basically kind of a field pea. Is what they make split peas out of.
Okay.
Slightly different variety, but. So they produce a lot of organic matter, fixes nitrogen. So that's anytime you have these type of things are more nitrogen fixers. So your hairy vetch and your red clover, those are good at adding nitrogen. And then as they break down the tops plus the roots, it can feed the next crop. So if you have corn or something, they're recommending planting hairy vetch and clover before you do corn during the winter time, to plant these, and then that adds the nitrogen that the corn needs over the growing season. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of idea there. Organic matter application, do you till it in? What do you do with it? Basically just lay it on the surface of the soil. I'm not sure why I wrote so much about that, but explained it all. But all the reasons why, but just so. Anyway, lay your compost and organic matter on the surface. Let biology infiltrate it rather than trying to till it all in, because it's going to stimulate. You're basically adding a bunch of air too, and all the bacteria are going to go like crazy, and they're going to just chew it all up. And generally, you have this beautiful soil that you've tilled in all this organic matter, or maybe even peat moss and things like that. But by the end of the year, it's like, ooh, this is kind of hard. It gets all hard again. It's like, where'd all my nice, beautiful soil go? It's just gone. And so a lot of times it's worse than it was before. And so I found it's like, well, if you can get away with not doing too much disturbing of that and making it too fluffy. In fact, you even if you do till, you can walk on it a little bit, make a little trail and try to compact it a little bit more. But the problem is you have nice soil structure with little holes and little canals. All the worms have done this, and then you till it all up and compact it, and all those little canals are now gone. All the structure that it had before is now gone, and so it always gets more compacted than it was before you tilled it.
Wow.
And so you want to minimize as much as possible.
So is there a cover crop that I could just weed whack down without having to till?
Well, anything that
you don't
isn't,
disturb the soil.
that's right. So these guys here in this area, so these will last through the winter mostly. Kill about 24 degrees, so they'll last, the tillage radishes. The others, I couldn't find good information on these, but I think they're about the same, kind of in the same family. So somewhere in that 24-degree range is kind of where they'll die too. But they're not going to give. You can usually chop them off and they'll die. So those are the ones. If you want to start out easy, don't do the grain until you're a little more comfortable. Spading it in, or if you have a tiller or something that you can try to terminate with them. Because I've done it before with ryegrass, and it's like, okay, I chopped it all up, hoed it all up, try to cover it. Covering it with black plastic takes months and months before it dies, and even then they're just like, okay, well, it's yellow, but it's still alive. And you take it off for a couple weeks, and I'm like, well, now it's green again. It's still not dead. And I covered it with compost and covered it again, and it still didn't die. I'm like, so I had to sit there and I just hoe the whole thing out. Get all of it out and haul it off to compost. And so that was a lot of work. So it's like, well, I didn't really have a tiller at the time to really take care of it. So anyway, that's something to keep in mind and play with a little bit. Let's see here, soil mineral content. Yeah, we probably should save this for another meeting here. So we'll talk about how we can, So opening statement here, biology can provide 100% of plants' nutritional requirements provided the minerals are in the soil profile. So if it's in somewhere in your soil, even though it may not show up on a soil report or be immediately accessible, the biology can release it. So but the idea is that, well, how do you get the minerals in there if they're missing, and how do you know if they're missing? So we'll cover that another time. So anyway. 18 here, so that's probably good for now. So, all right.
2 weeks out?
Yep, so let's see what we got here. So we can put it on our calendar. So we got the 5th, the 12th, and the 19th. 19th of March. So you can put that on your calendar. Any questions about stuff or clarifications? Things that I thought was clear but weren't. Let's see, we go back through here. So we've got cover crops. We took it at transplant drench. So did you guys write this down? Create your own soil inoculants. So you can also buy it too. There's like Tanio has a bunch that you can get. And also they have one that's called like BioCoat Gold that you can like mix in with your seeds and get all the biology right on the seeds that you planted in, which is good. So that's available. You can ask me about that some other time. Let's see here, soil management, what to do. It all seemed to be, I don't know if that's, it's clear in my mind what I'm doing, but I don't know if I'm communicating it, kind of what to do, when and where. All the stuff in the fall, kind of chop things up, get them all covered for winter. It kind of depends on context too, and then the soil textures, so it's fairly clear, clay.
That's a cool
No.
chart. I like that.
So yep, got the solid sand, solid silt, and then all the stuff in the middle here, the loam. So about 20% to 25% clay, and so that would be right about 40%, 45% silt, and and about 40% sand. So that's what we have more down in well, actually probably out in this area. Well, no, I take that. Certain places I think have more of the loam, probably down by the rivers and lower down areas. But like I said, even down there by Jolene's place, it was still the same. Still wasn't pure loam. But then there's, I think, a range too. You could get all the way up to, 20%? So you can get up to 20% sand, and it still be called that.
I don't remember ever seeing a chart like that. I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. And then there's your test you can do, and all your soil horizons, just to give you a refresher there. So feed soil biology with compost, mulch, or cover crops. Kind of the last item that we did. Maintain in ideal environment for biology to live. Don't stress them out, just like you don't want to stress your plants out. You want to give them, enough moisture, but not too much, and you want to, make sure they have sunlight. Biology doesn't like sunlight, so protecting the soil surface from sunlight during the summer is also important too. So if it gets a lot of direct sun on bare soil, it's going to kill biology in there too and heat up the soil. We don't have as much problems, back Midwest, which is a lot where John Kempf is, his experience is, you get a lot more heat. And down south, you get a lot more heat. So you're always worried about the soil temperature. And around here, you're kind of you can get up to 80 degrees on a warm day, but we don't have too much of the sterilization process from getting the soil too hot as other parts of the country does. But, just try to keep it under 80 degrees is kind of the goal of your soil. Beyond that, things start to die off, and when you hit 110, then everything's dead at about 110. And that's the same thing for doing bread. In case you ever make bread with yeast, that's the same temperature for yeast. That's your cutoff point. You get get 100 degrees for your water. You put your yeast in and get it all going, but 110 it'll die. So that's kind of interesting to think about. That's help you remember some of the numbers if you do. Yeah. So all right, let's close with a word of prayer here. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all that you provide us and giving us the opportunity to grow food and grow other flowers and other nice things, and help us understand the different principles and how to apply them. Give us your Holy Spirit to guide us as we do the different gardening activities, and remind us of the things that we need to do and to not do, and help us to know how they apply to our particular situation. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
So,